Good evening. My name is Joel Snow, and I'm with the International Institute for Theoretical and Applied Physics. And this is the latest in the lecture series on science and technology for sustainable development. James Berry will introduce our speaker in just a minute. I just want to give you a little bit of background. The lecture series is supported by the Office of the President. That's not Bill Clinton, but it is Martin Jischke. The International Institute of Theoretical and Applied Physics, the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and the Committee on Lectures, which always needs to be identified as funded by the graduate student body. The government of the student body, excuse me. The series is designed to bring noted scientists and engineers and other distinguished lecturers to campus to stimulate multidisciplinary dialogue on issues of importance to the future of our society in the coming century. In particular, we hope to strengthen the capacity of our academic community to contribute to achieving sustainable global and regional development, preparing our students for leadership roles and meeting the economic and environmental challenges ahead is also a driving force in establishing this lecture series. Just after the presentation tonight, there will be a reception. There will be food and drink over in that corner of the hall. And at this juncture, let me give you Dr. James Berry.
It's my pleasure, on behalf of all the sponsors and Iowa State University, to welcome Dr. Kurt Gottfried to campus for his lecture this evening. Dr. Gottfried is the chairman of the board of the Union of Concerned Scientists, an organization which he helped co-organize in 1969. And he's especially well known for his efforts in understanding and researching the threats of nuclear war and nuclear terrorism. He's given testimony on the complexities of defense against missiles and the deployment and effective use of nuclear weapons for security. He's one of our most renowned and outspoken specialists in these areas, but I would also like to add that he is an accomplished research scientist as well. He has about 100 refereed publications in nuclear and particle physics, and on the theoretical side, he's one of the attributes of his work is that there's a sum rule named after him called the Gottfried sum rule. He also has done extensive research more recently into the foundations of quantum mechanics, and yesterday gave us a colloquium in the physics department concerning his recent research in this area. He has numerous publications as well in the area of science policy, having to do with the deployment of weapons and the strategic posture of the United States. Most recently, for example, in Scientific American and also in Nature. And he deals with very complex issues that we all confront, and is highly regarded for his very careful analysis and also his outspoken views on these matters. So tonight he's going to speak in particular on nuclear weapons and international security. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kurt Gottfried.
Thank you very much. Please make sure that you can hear me because my voice doesn't carry all that well, and this microphone is not movable unless I move it. So the issue I'm talking about is actually in a very interesting and rather dramatic way, of course, concerns itself with sustainable development. Because if what I'm talking about is not kept under control, we will have very unsustainable developments. It's now 40 years, roughly, or actually it is 40 years from the end of 1950, say to 1990, the United States and the Soviet Union devoted prodigious resources, both human and material, to developing an insanely dangerous situation. The ability to destroy each other on only a few minutes' notice. We both perfected organizations that could decide to carry out this act in a matter literally of minutes, and to complete the act, that is to cause enormous destruction within the hour of the decision. Now, we got into this, I think by any meaning of the word insane, this insane situation through a large number of steps. Some of these steps were only in retrospect stupid. Some of them were often recognized at the time as being stupid. But in fact, many of them were almost unavoidable as a consequence of the preceding steps. So you had a large number of steps which eventually led to a more and more dangerous situation. And somehow, once one got on this slippery slope, the slippery slope, of course, being caused by this coincidence, it's really a coincidence of the discovery of first fission weapons and then thermonuclear weapons at the same time as the United States and its allies confronted Stalin, the Soviet Union under Stalin. Once we got onto this slippery slope, it really was extremely difficult to get off it. And in fact, we now can see, I think, very clearly that it was much more difficult to get off it than we thought at the time. Because the Soviet Union has been gone for a decade. And this insane situation that was produced by the Cold War, in some important sense, has not changed. And that's what I want to basically talk about. So the way I like to put it is that we have an insane situation which used to have an insane logic, and now we have an insane situation without an insane logic. It's just there. Now, you might at first think that what I'm talking about is that I'm out of control. After all, we all know that there have been important changes. The weapons have been reduced. I'll talk a little about that. But the issue is not widely recognized that the number of weapons, while important, is really not fundamental to judging the danger of the situation. The numerical sizes of the arsenals are not, and I want to repeat, they are not a good indicator of the dangers that they pose. The real indicators are the military plans for the use of the weapons, the plans that are designed to make them usable on incredibly short notice, on warning of attack, and the fact that this warning might be false. So the arsenal's size is, to a large measure, secondary to these considerations. Now, why are the arsenal's size not that important? It's basically because the weapons are so enormously powerful. Every weapon we have today, on average, I'm talking about strategic weapons for use in intercontinental ballistic missiles in particular, are on average some 10 times more powerful than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki weapon, roughly speaking. And so that even if all the arms control proposals that have been talked about were to be signed immediately and implemented immediately, we would then be left with something like 2,000 strategic warheads on each side, which is a lot better than 10,000 at the time of the end of the Cold War, and it's also better than the 6,000 we have today. Still, 2,000 thermonuclear warheads are enough to produce a disaster that's just beyond our imagination. Now, of course, the likelihood of such a disaster does depend on the political climate. It's not just an issue of technical means of destruction. So the likelihood of the disaster does depend on the political climate in which a decision to use the weapons would be made. It would be dependent on the validity of the information that leads to such a decision, and it would depend also on the ability of the organizations, which I'll try to indicate to you, are enormously complex organizations of men and procedures and machines, to assess the information, to decide whether it is valid information, to execute the decision, and to follow rigid pre-existing plans that leave very few minutes for deliberation. And I mean very few minutes. So it's not possible, of course, to make a credible estimate of the likelihood of such a disaster. And I don't even want to spend any time on how likely that is, because I frankly wouldn't know how to do it. But I don't think it's obvious that the likelihood of the disaster is significantly smaller than it was during the Cold War. And that, to me, is an unacceptable situation. In a certain sense, before the Cold War was ended, you could rationalize why we had to stay in this situation, but I think today the rationalization for the current situation is essentially untenable. So just to make, there are many, this is in university, so it therefore has many students who were fortunate to not live through this whole period, and you may not all be aware of the facts that I'm talking about, or you may even not believe that they're facts, because it does sound so implausible. So let me just quickly go through some of the basic facts that lie behind what I'm talking about. I think this, I'm not too happy with this. That's better. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So I've called this Apocalypse on a Tight Schedule. So the facts are, a missile takes about 25 minutes to 30 minutes to fly from Montana to central Russia, or the other way around. And about 15 minutes or less to go from a submarine that launches ballistic missiles from, say, the North Atlantic to either Moscow or Washington. Another very important fact is that modern land-based and submarine-based missiles have an accuracy that's sufficient to destroy a hardened missile silo with rather high confidence. Both sides have the ability to decapitate each other, that is to destroy their command, their leadership, military and civilian leadership, and a very large portion of their strategic forces if the opponent is in its peacetime posture, has not taken measures to protect itself. And these vulnerabilities led the United States and the Soviet Union to develop the technical means and the command organization to launch large portions of their land-based missiles on warning of attack. Now let me show you just a bit quickly what the U.S. warning system consisted of. It consisted of satellites. Here they are. 3 satellites in geosynchronous orbits, high orbits, which look at the whole globe and which can see and signal to command headquarters within about a minute the launch of a missile anywhere on the Earth. And this system is sufficiently powerful that, according to all reports, it saw all Scud missiles launched during the Gulf War. So much smaller missiles than ballistic missiles in intercontinental warfare. The next thing that we have are, so these would see any missile launch. Then here's the U.S. radar network. Here, that spot, that white spot in the middle is, roughly speaking, the United States. We are sitting right about in the middle of the white spot. And these gray areas are radar fans for what's called the ballistic missile early warning radars. So the idea is that that a warning of attack consists of two signals which have to match. The satellites have to see the launch of a missile, and they can give a rough estimate of what direction that missile is going in. And then in the time that you can calculate by just using mechanics, as when that missile should appear in a radar has to show that missile. If only a radar shows it, or only the satellite shows it, or if the radar shows something going in the wrong direction, that's just considered an accidental error and ignored. But if there is a proper coincidence, then that is a potential attack. Now, to give you some feeling for the complexity of the command organization, I'm not going to leave this on very long because it's either has to stay on for half an hour or 10 seconds. But this is the U.S. During the Cold War, the U.S. command and control system for strategic forces. And I'll just quickly go over it. Here is SAC headquarters. The blue is the wartime, is the peacetime system. Everybody's sitting in their office, so to say. All the silos are not on alert. Till the end of the Cold War, we always had an airborne command post. The SAC headquarters had a ground headquarters and also a whole command team in the air at all times, 24 hours a day for some 30 years. And all the commanders, say for the Atlantic Fleet and the Pacific Fleet, had airborne command posts. And if there was an alert, then all sorts of things took place, which I don't want to go through. But this system was able to launch the forces from the air. Even if SAC headquarters was destroyed, the airplanes could launch the missiles. It's much, much more complicated than that. I mean, enormous and ingenious efforts went into it. Now, the Russian system, this is really what is the burden of what I'm going to be talking about in a sense. The Russian system was comparable, though not as sophisticated in important ways. Here's the Russian satellite system. These are the early warnings Russian satellites. They were not in geosynchronous orbit. They were in these strange, very elliptical orbits and had many satellites on them. And the reason was that the Russians did not apparently have the technology to see a missile launch unless it was seen against the black background of space. We could see missile launches against clouds and glaciers or whatever by data processing. I don't want to go into that. They had to see it against the background of space, and so they had to have enough satellites that they could always see a missile launching out of the missile fields in the Middle West against the background of space. And this was then a configuration that was designed for that purpose. And they had one geosynchronous satellite which could sweep the Atlantic for submarine launches from the Atlantic. And then they had, now today that system is very degraded. It's so I can't tell you how degraded it's because I'm not quite sure, but apparently we know that this system is highly degraded because the satellites are not in their proper orbits and the orbits keep changing. And this geosynchronous satellite can't see most of the ocean. So they have very poor, at best very poor warning from early warning satellites. The radar system, the Russian radar system, also has very serious problems. Here's the Russian radar. You remember the American one, which completely enveloped the United States. Actually, that's a slightly dated picture. It's from 1991 or so. I think we no longer look south of Florida towards the South Atlantic. We used to do that. But the Russian submarine fleet is not what it used to be, so I guess we're not worried about having launches from the Caribbean. Here is the Russian system. Moscow's in the middle here. And there is no radar coverage at all, this here is the North Pacific. So a submarine in the North Pacific launching towards central Russia would not be seen by their radar system. Partly the reason for this is the breakup of the Soviet Union, because the radar's over here. It's a long story, but one of the things is the radar, to be in conformity with the anti-ballistic missile system, the radar could not be in Russia. It would have to be in one of the former states of the Soviet Union. And over here, it's even more striking. The hole over here, which points to the North Atlantic, used to be covered by a radar in Latvia. But Latvia left the Soviet Union, and that radar was dismantled. And in fact, I'm told it was dismantled with the help of U.S. funds. Now, here is the schedule of what I call, apocalypse on a tight schedule. Here is so believe it or not, many of you may know this, but many don't. As time progressed, especially during the 70s, as missile accuracies kept improving, and as the forces on both sides kept improving, and as they therefore became more vulnerable, both the Soviet Union and the United States moved towards some, what I might call prompt launch, a strategy where you would launch missiles either on warning of attack or on the first absolute evidence of attack, as soon as the first nuclear explosion took place. That's an enormously tight and strenuous regime to work under. And to give you some feeling for it, this is a time plot which is written, it comes out of a publication by this was put together during the 80s by a man named Walter Slocum, who was Undersecretary of Defense under the Carter administration and who now is again Undersecretary of Defense. So this is not my, an artist's conception. So here is at this point you see a launch of a Russian land-based missile. That's 30 minutes. And here, I don't know why time runs in this direction, but anyway, 30 minutes later it lands. And this gives you the warning of the satellite. Then there's a threat assessment. I mean, here people start coming in. After 5 minutes, there's a threat assessment conference. Confirmation of the launch sought from satellites. Radars start to detect the ICBMs. This here is the last time to generate a message for the ballistic missiles, U.S. ballistic missiles, to be launched under attack. That's after 20 minutes. By this time, the signal has to go from North America, from military headquarters in Wyoming to the Pentagon, to the president, or his delegate, and a decision has to be made because it takes all of 5 or 6 minutes, which isn't very much, to formulate obviously an order that was constructed long ago by somebody, or from a menu of orders. And here's the last chance for missiles to be launched so that they are not destroyed while they're rising. Now this is the scenario that's much shorter, as you can see, for Russian launch on warning from an attack by a submarine, U.S. submarine. Let's not go through that. It takes 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, something like that. Now why do I show the Russians being on a shorter time leash? The reason is that the United States developed during the 80s, I mean the Russians did too, but not to the same extent, an enormously capable submarine-launched missile capability. Our missiles on submarines are as accurate as land-based missiles, perhaps more accurate. They're the most modern warheads are on submarines. And there's enough, in principle, submarines at sea to destroy the Soviet command system and most of their land-based missiles if in peacetime, because in peacetime the land-based missiles in the Soviet in now Russia they're mobile missiles, most of them, but they're not out on the road, so to say. They're in garrison, and so they're sitting ducks. So if there were to be a surprise attack, it would be not that difficult to get them. So that's the situation we face today, that we have Russia facing both sides still face, in principle, an enormous threat, but in the case of Russia, it does not have the capability to really make a proper assessment of attack. Now, I want to, let's see, how much, you have to give me some feel. There's no clock in this room. 25 to go. Okay. Now, this system is amazing. The first thing I want to say, and say that with the greatest of emphasis, the military has been amazing on both sides, that they have been managing this unbelievable system for, decade after decade without having a catastrophic accident. So anything I'm saying here is not a criticism of the military doing these things. It's amazing that they've done so well. But there have been a rather small number of screw-ups. There was there's one in 1979, I think it is, when somebody in NORAD headquarters put a training tape into the wrong computer, which simulated a large Russian attack. With the satellites and all that system went off with a large attack. And it went through the command chain up to the military. It's not totally clear whether it went to Brzezinski, who was Carter's national security advisor, or his military advisor. But they were hauled out of bed and told that there was a possibility of a Russian missile attack. And, in a few minutes you may have to call the president. And then someone along the line, probably, I'm not sure whether it was probably in the Pentagon, asked to see the data from the satellites and the actual data. And there was no data because it was just a training tape. But they wanted to see the data that came from the satellites and the ballistic and the radar. There wasn't any. So there was also another one almost within a year, which was not taken as seriously because of the first one, when there was some computer chip that went crazy and also generated a fake thing. A more worrisome thing happened under sort of roughly current circumstances in 1995, when NASA launched a missile from an island in the extreme Arctic, which was sent up to study ionospheric phenomena. And the Russians seem to have taken this as a precursor to an attack, because it went up in direct line between central Russia and Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. And one of the standard scenarios for starting a nuclear attack is to put up a high altitude from a submarine nuclear explosion to set off high atmospheric phenomena which would blind radars. So what we do know is that they called a high-level alert, which went all the way to Yeltsin, who called it off. At that point, they may still have had enough satellite capability to see that there were no subsequent launches, but it is believed they would not be able to do that today. They would just have to assume basically that it was a mistake, which is a safe assumption actually, probably safer than doing something about it. But anyway, so that's a situation that we now have, and which is now you might. I don't want to spend too much time right now as to why do we still have this situation. Well, I can't spend too much time on it because I can't explain it. But I'll just be very brief. At the beginning of the Carter administration, there was a high-level review of what's called a nuclear posture review. And that posture review, after several, maybe a year or so in the bowels of the bureaucracy, came back with a decision which essentially amounts to staying with the Cold War posture of the nuclear forces, and not changing the. I mean, I'm not talking now about the numbers only, but with the whole war plans based on prompt response to attack and so forth, and with a posture which, of course, was designed in a way to continue presenting a very serious threat to Russia. We, of course, don't know what the Russians did. Now, now, if we're going to address this situation, we will clearly have. This is not a technical problem, really. It is basically a political problem. All these problems, in the end, are usually political, although the technical ingredient is, of course, enormously important. If there were no thermonuclear weapons and no ballistic missiles, we wouldn't be talking about this particular situation. So I'm not trying to say that the technical component of this is irrelevant. So I might like to I will try to come back and say what I think are some things that have to be done, that could be done to get out of this situation, and I'll come back to that then. I want to briefly talk about two other current developments involving strategic weapons, which play into this. They don't play into it in a very powerful way, but they do. And they're both things that are much more in the news. I mean, probably I would, without insulting people, but one way of looking, why should anybody really worry about this crazy thing? That's somebody else's problem. And therefore, most people are not aware that it even exists, which is, if nothing happens, is perfectly sensible. There are other things to be worried about some very low probability catastrophe. So the other two things which are very much in the news, I'll briefly want to talk about. One is the plan by the Clinton administration, under a lot of pressure from Congress, to deploy a missile defense against a national missile defense system, which the president is supposed to decide to deploy this fall. Now, the threat that is supposed to address is the possibility that so-called rogue states, North Korea, Iraq, Iran are the usual ones that's identified in this nice way, are acquiring a capability to have intercontinental ballistic missiles, and perhaps also acquiring the capability to build nuclear warheads or biological weapons. And the ballistic missile, this national missile defense is one of these high-tech systems designed with the mission of shooting down missiles that come in from such small attacks. Why small attacks? Well, because we've painfully learned, and I don't have time, and this would be a whole lecture series, we've painfully learned that it is virtually impossible to defend against a large attack. This is the third attempt by the United States to put up a missile defense. The Russians did it once. In fact, this is a stupid move that was started by the Russians. The Russians put up a ballistic missile defense of Moscow, which still is there, and everybody, including I think the Russians, agree that the end product of that is that many more U.S. missiles are now targeted on Moscow than they were before this missile defense was put up. But it eventually led us, under the Johnson and Nixon administration, to try to to design a missile defense system, which was in fact eventually deployed. One battery in North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota, was up for a year and then dismantled because it was decided it wasn't cost effective. It had the reason that was that collapsed was really a recognition by both the United States and the Soviet Union that it was cheaper to build more attacking missiles than defensive measures, and that what would happen was what happened to Moscow, namely you would simply have more, it was cheaper for the opponent to build more missiles than it was for you to defend against them, and so you would simply be accelerating the arms race. And the the ABM treaty was designed to prevent that from happening. It's a very sophisticated, complicated, and actually very clever treaty, which would take an hour to go into explaining why it's written the way it is. So the lesson of that was that you can't, that if against a large attack it is futile, at least it may be not futile anymore against Russia in principle, because Russia no longer has the economic resources to perhaps respond. But I think it's fair to say that no one, as far as I can tell in Washington, on any political quarter, is thinking that this current national missile defense is going to be used eventually against Russia, at least against a Russian force of current size. However, when you put it together with the disparity in capabilities of Russia now and the United States, it does have some impact on what we might do to address the situation that I described first about that has brought Russia and the United States, or has left, I shouldn't say has brought, has left Russia and the United States in this, what I called, insane situation. I have some transparencies to show for the missile defense system, but I think I won't show it because it'll just flood you with more things flying around in the sky. Just show you if you had one. Here's one. Obviously, it'll take 15 minutes to describe it. You have all sorts of satellites. It's the usual thing, Star Wars type thing, but much scaled down. Very simple compared to Star Wars, which of course never existed except in the budget. Radars all over, and satellites and interceptors and so forth. And so eventually, when fully deployed, the system will have some capability against, quite a lot of capability against China, even though it's not ostensibly designed against China. And also some capability against Russia, not very much, but some. And the impact on Russia, I think, since that's the focus of what I want to talk about, is that it will put a floor under which the Russians will not be willing to reduce. The reason is simply enough that as you reduce your forces, if you are caught in a surprise attack, you might be left with just a very small number of missiles, and then a not very capable system might really start to be capable against that residual counterattack. And you may think this is crazy, but a way of thinking about things. But I think there's absolutely no question, if the tables were reversed, from everything I've seen over the years in dealing with a lot of military people and planners, we would certainly never go down to low levels if the shoe was on the other foot, because any, not even worst case analysis, but even any sensible analysis will tell you that that's a pretty dangerous situation to be in, to have the other person have stronger offensive forces plus a defensive force, especially when you're strapped for fun and can't respond. Insofar as proliferation is concerned, of course, this everything that I've talked about sends the very clear message to everybody in the world, all the would-be nuclear states, that we put an enormously high value on our nuclear capabilities. And this was brought out very significantly in the defeat of the Test Ban Treaty by the Senate. We have, without question, by far the most sophisticated, capable, and secure nuclear forces. And yet, the opponents who succeeded in defeating the attempt to ratify the treaty basically made the argument that we cannot tolerate any question whatsoever about the capability of these forces, say 10 or 15 years from now, or even at any, because if we're not testing, then there may be some smidgen of uncertainty about our capabilities, and that will be an intolerable vulnerability. Of course, they're also saying that to all other states that don't have nuclear weapons, that it's not good for you to have nuclear weapons. It's bad for your security. But for us, even though we have thousands of nuclear weapons, we've been building them for 50 years, they always work. There's no question that they work, that we can't afford to have any insecurity about them. It's not a very, I thought Mr. Clinton's speech in front of the Indian Parliament was really, in a sense, an absurdity, because he was lecturing them that it wouldn't be good for their security to have nuclear weapons, while he's the leader of the state that will not tolerate any question whatsoever about, even totally unreasonable questions. Because I just wanted to show you one slide about the test ban situation. This is a record of all the underground tests in the period 1958 to 1992. Underground testing stopped in 1992. This is some 8, and these are a record of all indications of problems with nuclear weapons that were shown up. And there were 830 problems shown up. Now, of these, you see, most of them were, this is not, incidentally, problems with nuclear weapons while they're being developed. This is problems with nuclear weapons that are commissioned and sitting out in a silo or on a strategic bomber or in a submarine. This biggest bunch are laboratory tests. And anyway, all except this one box, underground tests, which is 1% of them, were problems that were found that wouldn't, by techniques that would not be forbidden by the test ban treaty. So in other words, the test ban treaty, the underground tests have been essentially irrelevant to verifying the reliability of the deployed weapons. The underground tests have been important to developing new weapons, but they have been of not even of barely marginal importance to verifying the reliability of deployed weapons. Nevertheless, this smidgen of uncertainty was enough to defeat the treaty. Actually, I think there were many other domestic and other reasons for defeating the treaty, but which were more important, including the incompetence of the Clinton administration in presenting the treaty. And in fact, a lot of the problems we have here is due to the incompetence of the Clinton. I'll be very brutal about it, and frank about that. The Clinton administration has done a dreadful job in handling the whole nuclear weapon problem since it came to office. And I say that as a lifelong Democrat. Now, what might one do about this? Well, I think, as I said, there are two dimensions to this whole situation. One, many dimensions, but two broad dimensions. One is our relationship with Russia, which is today the only country, the only power that can really, destroy the United States, compared to what Russia could do by error, or by incompetence, or whatever, or by is enormous compared to what any rogue state can do. If we really get down to be really bloody-headed about it, if a North Korean, if you are willing to accept this totally implausible scenario of one of the weakest countries on earth, like North Korea, sending a nuclear missile to destroy, say, Los Angeles. This missile has a home address marked on it. We know exactly where it's coming from within a minute of launch. If you're willing to accept that, okay, then it will kill a lot of people. But that'll be nothing compared to what would happen if there was an erroneous Russian launch. So I would want to separate, for at least because of time, the issue of dealing with Russia and the issue of dealing with proliferation. Although they are linked, because I think it is not possible, or at least extremely difficult, virtually impossible to have an effective non-proliferation policy without the cooperation of Russia and China. Having a relationship with Russia which is more productive, well, at least more constructive in these directions, will have consequences for our non-proliferation policy also. So what are some of the things that we might do? There are some concrete things that one might want to do. And to show you that this is something that serious people have actually done some thinking about, I didn't know this till quite recently, there is a Congressional Budget Office study requested by Senator Daschle, who's the minority leader of the Senate, about a year and a half ago, for a sort of a menu of options of what we might do to help with the Russian early warning system. And here I'll just flash it quickly. There's 5 options. Some of them are politically not very sensible in a way. I mean, we have, the President Clinton has in a recent meeting, I think with Putin actually, proposed that we have some joint warning system. Many people think that doesn't really make too much sense because the Russians would have to be suspicious that we're giving them data that might be deceptive. It's not something they would be operating independently. But one of the things that I find particularly attractive is the following, is item 5 here, which is supposed to have a budget of $190 million, which in military terms is a pittance, and which would be a joint American-Russian venture to explore technology for the next generation of early warning satellites. Now that won't solve the problem right away, but it would solve them within a matter of 5 or 6 years, and that there's a detailed study of this. This can be done without transferring technology that would endanger the security of the United States as it